Good day and welcome to the dining room table. United Nations Security Council Middle East Resolution passed. State of Palestine speaks. Subscribe, like, and share. The United Nations Security Council has passed a resolution bringing humanitarian aid to Gaza for the civilians in Gaza, for the hostages, and to release the hostages. Um, you know, War going on. You have Israel sending missiles. You have Hamas sending missiles. There are people there. There are the Palestinian people there, children, babies, families. The hostages who are still there are facing the same life of needing water and healthcare and food. So we don't often get to hear from the state of Palestine on what is happening and how they feel and what is needed. So unless they come to the United Nations and they give their statement. So here is a representative from the state of Palestine, um, a very teary-eye moment when they explain just what's happening to the people who have nothing to do with nothing and they're in the middle of war. Let's hear from him.
Mr. President, this conflict first met to address this council, first met to address this grave crisis when hundreds of Palestinians had been killed by Israel, the occupying power, in its siege and aggression on the Gaza Strip. The council is now meeting after over 20,000 Palestinians have been killed, almost half of them children, and 60,000 people have been wounded, and 2 million Palestinians have been forcefully displaced. It is meeting as homes, shelters, schools, hospitals have been destroyed, and as hunger and disease are spreading like wildfire. No one should forget that what we are talking about are 2.3 million Palestinians who have been fighting for their life and facing death every single day for 75 days. They have been fighting for their lives, for their very existence for over 75 days. Mr. President, the Arab and the OIC groups, with the support of an overwhelming number of UN member states, have been mobilizing for three objectives. And we said that from the beginning. End the carnage immediately, immediate ceasefire, humanitarian assistance at scale, and no forced displacement. We meet today as part of this continuous effort to advance these three goals. Mr. President, allow me at the onset to pay tribute to all the humanitarian and health care workers who, at peril to their own lives, are struggling every single day to address and alleviate an occupation-made humanitarian catastrophe of unprecedented scale. They are operating under conditions where no place and no one is safe, under widespread and indiscriminate bombing, where hospitals and shelters and ambulances are shelled, and with minimal to no access to humanitarian supplies necessary to sustain and save lives. We pay tribute to the Palestine Red Crescent, in which many of you have met them in your trip to the Rafah crossing, to Palestinian medical and civilian rescue teams, to the personnel of the United Nations and its agencies, notably UNRWA, to the members of Palestinian and international humanitarian organizations on the ground, and to the ICRC, Their work is heroic and deserves our utmost recognition and respect. The draft resolution presented by the United Arab Emirates is to allow them to conduct their sacred mission to assist civilians in need to save human lives as Israel, the occupying power, continues to ignore the global demands for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and to deprive the Palestinian people of the humanitarian aid they desperately need. There are thousands of trucks of humanitarian aid on the Egyptian side, and Egypt's full willingness and mobilization to see this aid delivered. You saw those thousands of truckloads from your trip from Al Arish airport to the Rafah crossing. There are over 2 million Palestinians in desperate need of such aid on the Palestinian side. This inhumane and criminal Israeli siege, this use of humanitarian aid necessary for the survival of the population as method of war has to end, and it has to end now. Mr. President, on 4th of November, the deputy head of the Israeli civil administration stated from inside Gaza, and I quote, whoever returns here, if they return here after, will find scorched earth, no houses, no agriculture, no nothing. They have no future. End of quotation. This is just one statement among far too many, demonstrating in shocking terms that what we are dealing with is an attempt at the destruction of our people and their displacement forever from their land. This is Israel's goal, its true objective. No future for Palestinians in Palestine. That is why it is bombing everyone and everything. That is why it targets homes, hospitals, schools, bakeries, agricultural fields, water and sanitation networks, so that sustenance of life becomes impossible, and it has become impossible. That is why it targets the landmarks of Gaza, which stand witness of its ancient history and of our roots in the land, our historic churches and mosques, our monuments, and our architecture. Israel also targets the storytellers, those who capture our people's lives, suffering, and death, including the journalists conveying to the world the truth about the massacres, about this grave and unbearable injustice being endured by Palestinian people and their families. But Israel's target is not only the past and the present of our people, but indeed the future. That is why it kills our doctors, engineers, poets, academics, artists. This is why it is destroying our cities and towns, our universities and cultural institutions. That is why it kills our children and terrorizes and traumatizes them, scaring and disfiguring their futures. We often quote the number of children killed, an unbearable tragedy. But we should not forget the 25,000 children orphaned and the tens of thousands wounded and amputated. A 12-year-old Palestinian girl with the most beautiful of names, Dunya, which means Dunya in Arabic, it means the whole world, lost both her parents. her, her sister, and her brother, all killed in Israelis shelling of her house. She also lost her leg, and I believe she was interviewed by the CNN journalist that United Arab Emirates managed to let her enter the Gaza Strip and to make that important report that she did. And Donia said that while she will never forget her loved ones, she has to continue living, that she would become a doctor to help children as doctors helped her. But Dunya did not live to become a doctor or to memorialize her family. She was killed a few days ago later in the strike in the maternity ward of Al-Nasr hospital. Israel wants to convince us that we need to choose between life and our country by making life in our country impossible. Our people want to live in their country. They want their children to grow safely in their country. There is no simpler dream. There is no aspiration more sacred than that. Mr. President, Israel's treatment of Palestinian civilians and its abhorrent crimes against them were further starkly revealed after Israel killed 3 people raising a white flag and representing no danger. It later discovered that they were 3 Israelis who had been held captive in Gaza. It could have saved them had it observed the laws of war, but it thought they were Palestinians and shot them. In yet another display of total abject disregard for Palestinian lives. This confirms the many reports of summary executions of Palestinians being murdered in cold blood by Israeli soldiers in Gaza. Israel has also continued its ill treatment and mass arrest and humiliation of Palestinians in despicable scenes filmed by its own soldiers, boasting about their depravity. Those are the soldiers of a Ragu army, unhinged and empowered by the impunity it enjoys, certain that it will not be held accountable, an army that commits atrocities every single day. In the words of Israelis' closest allies, its indiscriminate bombing and its killing rage needs to stop. That means its crimes need to stop. Gaza is like a patient whose wounds you are trying to treat while the killer keeps shooting at them. You need to stop the killer, or you will never be able to save the patient. Mr. President, death is everywhere in Gaza in its different manifestations: destruction, deprivation, disease. People are starving. They have no water, no food, no medicine, or barely any. The draft resolution that the Council voted on today is intended to help address this inhumane situation, to alleviate the untold suffering and pain being borne by millions of civilians. We welcome the decision to establish a UN mechanisms to accelerate the provision of humanitarian relief consignments to Gaza and call for its rapid implementation. The Council also called for urgent steps to immediately allow safe, unhindered, and expanded humanitarian access. The Secretary General and all UN agencies as well as humanitarian organizations, have all said that this requires an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, now backed by 153 states around the world. It took this council 75 days to finally utter the word cessation of hostilities. To utter the word cessation of hostilities. 40 days after the General Assembly first referred to that objective and tens of thousands of Palestinians killed later. We support the Russian amendment and the United Arab Emirates as Arab representative reflected that support in its vote. Of course, that paragraph, which was endorsed in the blue form, the original one, by the 83 co-sponsors. The resolution is also clear about the unwavering commitment to the two-state solution consistent with international law and UN resolutions, and in this context, on the status of the Gaza Strip as an integral part of the territory occupied in 1967 and as part of the Palestinian state, and on the unity of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and the role of the Palestinian Authority, and the complete rejection of forced displacement in violation of international law. Mr. President, let us act now to save lives, to provide life-saving assistance and life-sustaining hope. This resolution is a step in the right direction. It must be implemented and must be accompanied by massive pressure for an immediate ceasefire. I repeat, immediate ceasefire. There is no way to stop the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide underway, but an immediate ceasefire. Ceasefire again. There is no way to start addressing the occupation made humanitarian catastrophe, but an immediate ceasefire. Ceasefire again. There is no way to release those held captive, but an immediate ceasefire. This resolution calls for protection of civilians, deplores attacks against civilians, rejects forced displacement, calls for immediate and safe humanitarian access, and for humanitarian aid reaching the Palestinian population. All that requires an immediate ceasefire. Immediate ceasefire, as requested and as called for by the Secretary General in his famous letter to the Security Council. Humanity must prevail. International law must prevail. Millions of lives hang in the balance. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.